created only by your imagination. So often a feature story is a simple story about a common person, say in an uncommon circumstances. So the feature's job is to find a fresh angle to find the story behind that person or particular issue. Okay. So topics that deal with the ordinary, for example, foreign exchange students, eating disorders, or part-time jobs. Then we have features on teacher, then your favorite celebrities or fashion trends, and then you can write about unusual hobbies, favorite movies, or you can write a feature on fast food restaurants, or you can simply describe like fashion top 10 list of fashion trends. So these all come under feature story. Okay, then we have offbeat feature story ideas. Also we can write about the best books not to read. For example, you can write on tattoos, body piercing, then the truth about food, fast food, or crazy answering machine messages, and then you have cell phones. You can write offbeat feature stories also. So these are some of the offbeat feature story ideas. And one of the most popular types of feature story is the profile. What is a profile? A profile is a short, vivid character sketch. Not too many profiles turn into a tedious recounting of a. It can turn into a biography. So, too many profiles turn into a tedious recounting of biographical facts or are unrelated. You can also quote anecdotes between quotations, and a good profile includes impressions, explanations, and also point of views. It should also emphasize what is unique about that person. So here in the profiles, you can use a flashback technique, or you can highlight the individuals like many roles of an individual. So profile is one of the important aspect here, okay, of a feature story. Then there comes the lead. Lead is the beginning of the story, and it must pull the reader in. The lead should be capable of pulling the reader into the story. So the first sentence must make the reader want to read the second sentence. So the lead may or may not contain a hook, but a detail that draws in the reader's attention. The lead will keep the reader hooked onto the story. So some good feature leads include, we can have narrative feature, descriptive, then you can use some striking statements here. Okay, so these are some of the features of a good lead. And talking about the structure of a feature, see, after you have written the lead, you need a structure in which to place the information, right? So a structure is an organizational pattern where the writer uses to synthesize or what has to be established a relationship between relevant pieces of information. There has to be a logical coherence between the relationship of each pieces of information. So structure plays a very important role, and the structure can be in this manner. First, you can have a lead, then you can use quotes. Quotes can be, you can use your most dynamic quotes. Like, then after that, you can have a transition from or a fact. Then again, you can use a quote. So after each quote, you should have a smooth transition in the story. And good feature should have a lead. That means the important part, a good beginning, a good middle, and a good end. Okay. And then you can continue using alternating quotes and transitions all the way through your story. And then you can end your story on the second best quote you have to leave your reader with something to think about. Okay, you can use fascinating quotes, fancy quotes. If you can write, you can just quote in that manner. And then you have to find the right voice. Finding the right voices, you have many voices, like you have many ideas. You speak to your friends differently than you do to your parents, right, or your teachers. So if you have a job, you have a voice for your boss. Then when you write a story, you take on a persona of or character, right? A different character. You go, delve into a different character. So you must choose a voice that best imparts the information in that story. Okay. So the choice you make here becomes the tone of the story or mood of the story, and it should always match the content. For instance, you would not use humor to write about a tragic auto accident, right? So you have to use the right tone or set the right mood for your story. Okay, so this is about feature. Then there are I told you different types of features like human interest. Human interest feature involves persons rather than things here, and you can write features on for example, students who win an award or do something significant, for example, students scoring uh, good marks, for example 1600 on SAT or qualifying for some Olympic games. You can also write about a retiring teacher, or simple like what it's like to be a crossing a guard, something which added human value or human interest. Then you can also include interviews. Usually they are done with prominent persons, so it can be sometimes informational or personal profile feature. So informational interviews deal with an authority whose opinions are of significant value. Okay. And then whereas personality interviews are interesting because of the individual rather than the subject matter here, because it can be a celebrity. Okay. It can be of actor or a cricket personality, sports person. So it emphasizes more on the person than the subject matter. Then informational features can be of historical, social, or practical interest. And here the basic purpose is not to entertain, but to inform the readers. So for example, you can just inform about you can write about the history of the school, a feature on that, and how to features such as how to buy a good like mobile phone, or what to do if you are in mid of a crisis, or you are stuck in a lift, or what to do if you are arrested. All these things are like informational features, like providing information wherever necessary. Okay. Then we have on personality sketches also. You can develop a total picture of that person. You can attempt to reveal personality through anecdotes. Okay, some interesting quotes you can use, and you can look at their mannerisms, actions, dress, and their experience, the way they dress up. And facts readers will want to know, for example, the name, personality, background, or their physical appearance, the environment, or the hobbies, or you can also write about the influence they have on others. Okay, it can be based on your observation, and you can also use anecdotes. Okay, and also we have something called as featurettes. That means this is also called as mini features. That means it's not as lengthy as the original features, but it's like little short, but it's very clever and attention getting leads here. And there are events usually told in chronological order, and conclusion is often a surprise here. Okay, you have to leave the reader to imagine what could be the possible climax of the story. And these featurettes are very short, and they are told very quickly. Okay, so these are different types of features. So any doubts here on features? Then I'll tell you about how to write feature headlines. See, reporters are granted more scope when they write soft news feature stories, right? They are free to express their creativity here. So therefore, copy editors may also be given more license to take chances, and they can also do unusual things when they write headlines for feature stories. That means they can be more creative here. They can play with words. Okay. So a feature headline should reflect the tone of the feature story. Okay. See, if the story is restrained and sober, the headline should be restrained and it should be sober. If the story is light and humorous, the headline may take a light and humorous approach, of course. So in either case, the headline must also inform the reader what the story is all about. Okay. You can say bright headlines, they do not belong on serious stories, right? So no matter how clever the joke may seem to be, but the copy editor here will be responsible for handling the story and writing the headline. Because nevertheless, we can say a good purpose of a story may increase the price of coffee features. This can also be a good feature, and you can have too much humor in the headline or a story about a coffee, right? See, the character of the individual newspaper printing the story must always be considered by the headline writer. Like, how is the newspaper? If you're writing for the Hindu is different from Times of India, right? So some publications can get away with biting headlines or mean, or they can, give, they can involve fancy headline writing. But those some serious newspapers like the Hindu may not be considered, they are very sober in nature. They won't consider fancy headlines. So here, newspaper newspaper's policy or the writing style should be kept in mind by the copywriter here, and the author of the right or the feature should keep in mind the tone of the story before writing the headlines. So in addition to the challenges of feature stories, especially longer ones, they are often singled out for special design treatment by copy editors. They are the one, they edit your feature story using softwares like Quack Express, or even by the newspaper design department. They have separate department, right? So they can edit, or they can oddly position a single word headline, or they can entirely change the headlines, so depending upon the policy of the newspaper. So conveying humor or tragedy or excitement in a few short words, and at the same time providing the information necessary to summarize the news in the story, it is one of the most difficult challenges faced by any copy editor. Okay. See, generally speaking, the copy editors need to remember that there are times when headlines should rhymes. Okay. For example, rhyming words can be used in the headlines if it's a humorous story. Okay. There are many examples. If you take a newspaper and go through the feature stories, especially in the Sunday supplement, today's newspaper, you can see a lot of examples of feature stories, how the headline is written, what is the tone of the story, what is the mood of the story, what is the story trying to convey. And see, color, if we talk about color, a color story is a story that is heavily descriptive. That means it can work with a color headline. The headline can be in different colors. For example, if you're writing a feature on Holi, so you can use different types of colors in the headline, which depicts the tone of the story. So that is, as long as clarity is not sacrificed to the desire to paint a colorful picture in the headline. So you can experiment with a tone, with a color. All these things can be used in a story. And when it comes to humor, many of the headlines, these feature headlines, strive for humor, right? So sometimes the headlines can be poetic, or you can also play with words here. So some of them also, some copy editors succeed in doing so, like rhyme. They can use rhyming words or poetic words, and then you can experiment here. If the story is a light one, a humorous headline is entirely appropriate. Okay. And however, headline writers should also, or the copy editors, they should also strive not to write headlines that are unintentionally hilarious. See, we are all familiar with what genre you are writing, right? Long lists have circulated for years. So even before folks started buying these newspapers, feature stories, or subscribing the articles online, they have an certain idea, right? Like about what type of feature story they're writing. So experimenting is okay, but you should always remember the genre, whether it's a serious genre, or whether it's humor. So that should be kept in mind. Okay. So any doubts here? So to summarize, I will say feature headlines should reflect the tone of a feature story, and you should never write a humorous head. For example, on a serious story or a sober story, and the character of the newspaper running the story must be considered by the editor or a copywriter in determining whether a particular headline is appropriate or not before publishing. And then there are some softwares like technical design software such as Quack Express. They can have an impact on the approaches taken while writing feature headlines. And most feature headlines techniques need to be used sparingly and with utmost care. So as headlines play a very important role to keep the readers hooked on to the story. And there can be many techniques that can be used on feature or soft news stories, which includes humor or rhyme, twisted cliches, then color. As I said, color can also be used, and then you can have stories concerning tragic matters, for example, a bomb blast or an accident, train accident. All these deserve reserved headlines, so you cannot experiment much here. And then humor should be used with great caution in these type of stories, feature stories, and attention should be paid to the tone of the story. Okay, so this is all about feature writing. Any doubts? Then moving on to interviews. Interviewing, as we all know, right? Interviewing is writing the news story is only half the story, unless and until we include an interview part, right? So getting the story by interview is the other half of this story. So the most important way journalists get stories is by interviewing people and for whom they plan to write about, right? So obviously conducting interviews is one of the key tasks of journalism, or we can say it's a job of the journalist, and no reporter can avoid taking interviews. So we can say being able to elicit the answers you need from someone who you are interviewing is an essential skill for a journalist. So interviews may be conducted over the telephone or in person as well. And there are advantages to both approaches, right? See, over the telephone, the person being interviewed cannot see when you're taking notes, obviously, or whether you have a tape recorder running. Obviously, it's an ethical matter. You have to take the permission before recording anything. But this can be a significant psychological advantage in getting your interview subject to feel comfortable, right? On the other hand, when you interview someone in person, you are better able to perceive the nuances by observing their body language or their facial expression and other hints. So naturally, in-person interviews also provide you with some more options to observe and describe surroundings and write a more colorful story, right? And most veteran journalists, they would agree that the key to a successful interview is preparation. Okay, this does not mean that journalists cannot do well if they are thrown into a covering news on the spot or a breaking news stories as they break. But without the opportunity to plan or even any knowledge of whom they will be interviewing, in such circumstances, reporters must do whatever planning they can on the run. Like quickly, they can switch on their mobile phones. They can check on Google or on the or suppose if they are on the cab on the way to the scene of the crime. So while they take a deep breath before phoning the police department's desk, what they can do is they can get a good background hint about the story or about the person whom they're going to interview. This is for the breaking news story. If you're going to take an interview for a breaking story. So I'll say, nevertheless, planning for interviews when we can provide us with mental framework for preparing is best, as we can, in emergencies when there is little time, a little homework would in advance would help you out. So here are some things that you need to do to prepare for an interview. Step one would be a research. Okay, do at least some research before every interview. This can mean simply consulting the newspaper's files or clippings so that you can understand the basic outlines of the story. For example, we have this huge movement in Telangana formation, right? So if you want to know the more background detail of the story, you can go to the newspaper archive section or clippings, and then you can read about it, the background. And then, or it can mean extensive reading on the topic as well. And then you will have some of the records can be court records. And then we have academic textbooks also. Then journalists have their separate database known as journalistic databases, which are all appropriate places to look for information or for your research. Okay. So you may also want to talk of the record to your colleagues as well, or other journalists and former and present colleagues or associates of the persons you plan to interview. Like if you're planning to interview an officer, you can have a prior talk with their assistants or other persons involved, right? To improve your story. Good research, what a good research will do is it will help you inform and improve the story. It will also help defend you against those interview subjects who try to hide behind their expertise, right? So, and you can use it to intimidate those who could dare to ask them any questions. Then next step, which I would suggest, it will be a sales pitch. Sales pitch in the sense, many interview subjects are nervous about being interviewed, right? It's a general human tendency, or even hostile to the idea of helping you write your story. They are reluctant. So if you don't refuse, for example, if they refuse to outright or give you information, they may hesitate. So you should be prepared in advance while going to the interview, to be prepared to explain to your interviewer subject that why it is important and essential to your story. And you have to make the interview comfortable, right? And to think of arguments that might help persuade them to cooperate. That's what yesterday I told you. There should be an ice-breaking segment. You should make them feel comfortable by asking simple to complex questions. Okay. Then next step would be to make a list. Make a list in the sense you need to prepare a list of questions you need to ask. Spend some time on your list and think about the order in which you will ask questions. Okay, generally it's a good idea to start with softer, more general questions and then move to tougher questions that might cause the subject to cut off you towards the end of the interview. If you directly go and pose the straightforwardly, if you want to pose the questions, then the interview will not be comfortable, right? So a list will also help you stay on track if your interview is engaging the speaker, or sometimes the interview may use his charm and enthusiasm to keep you away from sensitive questions, right? So ask basic questions first. Like you can ask the 5W 1H questions like who, what, when. Then next would be a follow-up question. And then the controversial questions, which is the main objective of your interview, that can be asked later. Then your list should always include the final questions or the wrap-up question. So at the end, you can ask, is there anything you would like to add or tell me about this story? So this is a very important wrap-up question here. And the questions, whatever you are planning to ask, needs to be very brief. So think about this at the planning stage itself, right? And next step would be to request and identify yourself. Call for an appointment or to ask to conduct a telephonic interview, take their permission right away. So if it's a phone interview you want, then be prepared to proceed immediately, because there's also a time limit set, right? People are always moving, they're always busy. You need to be well prepared. So if you're new as a reporter, it may be tempting to put off what could be a challenging job for you. So here, but you may never get another chance again, right? If they say whatever you want to ask, you can ask immediately, otherwise I'm busy. Then your source is in the mood of answering the question. So don't let this opportunity slip away from you. Always clearly and honestly state who you are. Recognize yourself, identify yourself, and then for whom you work, your organization, and for what you want to do. Why do you want to take his interview? Okay, this may take a few. People refuse to talk after all listening all these things. Okay, we are working for so and so organization. For example, if you're working for Tehelka, they may get they may hesitate to give information, but most often when they do, they'll face no ethical dilemmas about having misled them to ask your true purpose. It's ethical ethical aspect where you have to disclose all your information. You can say something like, hi, this is so and so from so and so organization. I would like to interview about your plans to, like, whatever is the topic. So be prepared to negotiate politely, or else you can, if they have the secretary or personal assistant, you can negotiate with them. But if the secretary or the assistant blocks your attempts to request an interview, be prepared to consider other techniques, like other techniques of contacting them. Like if you are able to get their email IDs, you can send them an email, or you can directly call them. So remember, some senior officials read their own email, right? So it's better to try other techniques if all these things doesn't work out. And step 5 would be to dress appropriately. Okay, dress in a way that will set your interview subject at ease. So if you are interviewing, don't wear, we can say a 3-chalk stripe suit or a colorful uh, dresses, right? If you are interviewing a business executive, don't wear a t-shirt or casual. Always have a formal attire. Okay, many reporters, what they do is they try to strike a reasonable balance. For example, if they are going to interview a sports person, they would wear a sports jacket or a t-shirt or slacks. So it's nothing too fancy, but you have to be, what, pleasing enough, right? You have to be in your formal attire. So if you're a male, then be prepared to wear a tie, or so depending upon the background of the person. So if you are interviewing religious people in a place of worship, be respectful of their traditions. Okay, be prepared sometimes to wear religious headgear if requested. So for example, some people may ask you to take off your slippers or shoes outside a church or a mosque. So if you have to always respect the traditions and custom. Okay, if you are a female, you may want to put a headscarf for this reason. So if you're going to make a career of journalism, you have to, be adjustable, flexible. Okay. And then always be on time. If you simply cannot avoid being late, you have to well in advance, you have to inform them, and you have to call them ahead and explain the problem. But it's better always to avoid this, and don't put yourself in this position. Okay, because time, we have a saying, right? Time spent in reconnaissance is never wasted. So always be on time. And basic strategies for conducting interview would be, okay, if you are there on time, your subject is willing to be interviewed. So now what you must do is you must think about how to conduct an interview. So first would be to break the ice. Okay, as I said, don't start off an interview by being confrontational directly. Try to seat yourself in a comfortable and non-confrontational position, like be very comfortable. Then introduce yourself and restate your purpose. Like, why do you want to conduct this interview? Why are you here? So always look for ways to establish a rapport. Okay, but you have to make sure that you don't waste too much time on this phase, because you'll want to cut to the phase and quickly and fairly wrap up the interview once your objective is met. So always use a conversational style. See, you're not a police officer or where you have to interrogate, right? You don't have to use harsh tone. Okay, you have to be very simple. You have to ask your questions in a very basic, simple, and conversational style. So this will almost always work better. And also don't let your subject see your list, like what questions you have prepared, because they may be hesitating, right? After seeing a long list of questions can put them off or arouse their curiosity, right? They'll be scared. So try not to let them see, but put questions in the back of your word or your pad or a file, and flip back to refer to them. Okay, if you are one of the fortunate few, you can also memorize them without you having been looking at the notepad. Okay, then you can start with an easy question, and you can save the hard stuff for later if you can. So here the basics would be who, 5W and 1H, right? Who, what, when, where, why, and how. So they are always a good place to start your questions. But be ready to ask tough questions early if time is limited. Okay, always keep the deadline in mind. So you can, if suppose if the interview has given you 15 minutes, you don't have to waste your 10 minutes on these type of questions. Okay, so you can just use 5 minutes to make the interviewer comfortable, and then you can come directly to your point. And if your subject has booked an hour and served you tea, and then you probably have an opportunity to ask the tough stuff later at the end. Okay, and if they are limiting yourself to a few minutes, then you might have to go for your direct questions. And then you can also use open-ended and close-ended questions. You can mix them. Closed questions require a specific answer, right? Yes or no type of questions. Like what time did the, for example, if you're talking about a fire accident, then you can directly ask what time did the fire start. And then if you're going for open-ended questions, you can provide the interview subject with an opportunity to elaborate and provide explanation. Okay. And often this technique works best because if you alternately ask open-ended and close-ended questions, then moving from factual detail to explanation, this would be very easier. Okay, so you have to always think about this possibility when you create your list of questions. But remember that while posing open questions, they provide more opportunity for elaboration. As the interview, you never know what you're going to get, so you have to keep experimenting. So open-ended is always a very good option. Okay, but a closed question can allow you to close off an question without further elaboration. So if your subject evades such a question, you are within your rights to tell your readers that he was open, and then the subject elaborated and has given you insights into the story. Then you can always ask follow-up questions. Okay, so when the person you are interviewing answers one question, you may want to conversationally follow her lead and move to follow-up question, right? So often it makes sense to move from the general to the specific. So you have described your policy goals with this initiative. Can you give some example? This can be a follow-up question, an example here. So you have to be prepared to ask new questions and which are not on your list. That comes from the answers which the interviewer has given you. So if a new opportunity presents itself, you can in the answers you can start off like this. Okay, now you said you so and so, you said so and so, and then you can elaborate on that follow-up question. But you have to be prepared to move back to your key questions. Okay, and always try to stay in control. That means some interview subjects will try to run out of the clock, means to avoid the tough questions or the sensitive or controversial questions. They try to move away from that topic, or will try to distract or deviate you from the topic. So it's your job as an interviewer to keep track of time and also get back to the core question if they try to move too far away from the topic. But in this process, always remember that you should not be rude, but try to keep the interview on track. Okay, then you can ask background questions as well, because it's important to understand the background and context of situations. So be prepared to ask questions about the background and history of a story, and don't be put off if if the interviewer is uncooperative, because subjects will be different, right? And then it's a common technique to try to control the flow of question, and also you have to keep the entire off balance. For example, politely you can ask them anyway, let their for example, people can be rude in between and your interview when we are trying to pose them questions, the most controversial questions, right? So you should always remember at that point that you are here to serve your readers. Okay, and they need to know the little background just as you do. So you have to cooperate and be do not lose your control here. And then you can also repeat important questions. See, your subject won't answer questions again and again, right? If the situation demands, you can politely ask it again. Okay, you can maybe use different words or second or third time. Okay, sometimes it's surprising how often this technique works, but with otherwise intelligent people, what they do is the reporters, they use different words and different contexts and try to gain insight into those questions. So sometimes interviewers will get annoyed. Okay, but you have to make yourself clear. It's your right to ask for the repeating of the question, repeating a question that they have made it clear, so they won't answer. You have to try another techniques in which the answer can be repeated. For example, you can request definitions. Okay, you don't have to pretend to understand some jargons if you don't know. So you can ask them to repeat or request the definition, or you can ask them to elaborate, right? Because your readers need to know. Always keep in mind that you're writing for your readers. So always ask for explanations of terms which are not familiar with, or sometimes technical aspects of the story. Okay, so there is nothing wrong in repetition. And then get help with the chronology. If you are writing a story about a crime or an accident, then it's often helpful to ask your subject to help you construct a chronology of the events, like the sequence of the story. So you don't have to write your story in a chronological order, but you do need to understand the order in which events took place, okay, in order to write about it. So it's essential for you to understand the chronological order before writing it. When did it take place, the time, all those things you have to understand. And then you have to check and recheck. Okay, always get the person you are interviewing to spell names and technical terms. Okay, if you don't get those, you have to get them to confirm the title as well, designation, and confirm that all information you have taken down is correct. So if there's something, if they sometimes if they say something about someone else, be prepared to check it with that person, because sometimes it can be a rumor, right? So before publication, you need to check and recheck. That means you need to cross check. And then if there's time, save the tough questions for the last third of an interview. That means at the last. That way you have got something if your subject decides to walk away in the middle of the interview, right? So instead of asking the questions totally at the end, you can frame your questions in such a way that the main crux of the interview is there at the before the end of the story. But there may be times in an interview when you have to ask tough questions, right, at the beginning. So you can always use phrases like, now is the time to get to it, and then be prepared to use those tact words. And but you don't have to be so tactful that you fail to communicate what you're asking, right? See, it's pretty tough to ask questions about someone's financial inappropriateness. Like if you're talking about a financial aspect or some illegitimate part of your story, so you would be prepared best to ask clearly. Instead of asking them indirect questions, you can be straightforward and then you can ask them clearly. Okay, then you have to be get the names of others involved. See, for example, if your interviewer is giving you names or of people involved in that activity, you have to take down all those names, and then you have to confirm, cross check with those persons. And then not all interviews, of course, they must end with hard questions. Sometimes towards the end of an interview, it's a good idea to ask the names of other persons who could be interviewed about the same story here. So interview subjects will often be happy to help you out in this manner. Okay, then you have to give the subject an opportunity to raise concerns also. Okay, here always end with a question like, is there anything you would like to add or tell me about the story? This is only fair, right? But it is also used to protect you against accusations that you start clear of difficult topic. Okay, because they may blame you. Okay, this was not this is not the context in which I answered the question. So it's your job to ask them clearly, and then they cannot blame you that you fail to provide your subject with an opportunity to explain themselves, right? So it's a good question, and it helps cover you, and also you can ask them more questions in deep, and then ask them if you can call them back, because you can also close the interview by asking if it's okay if you call back if you have some follow-up questions, and most people will definitely say yes. So you have to use this opportunity to get their contact information, email address, or their phone number. Okay, if you are unable to get their direct numbers, you can get the numbers of their secretaries, of their assistants phone line, right? So this is often your best chance to get such information and provide so that it can be a source of information and you can expand your network. So often you will need to ask a follow-up questions, and sometimes you won't require, but keep their number safe for the next time or for your network. Okay. So any questions on interviewing? There are some additional thoughts on interviews as well. See, get the full names of everyone involved in the story you're covering. Okay. Check the spellings. You can spell check, ask people how to spell their names and the names of the people you're talking right about, and you can write their name in your notepad and show the page and ask them to correct it. Okay, so you'll often catch mistakes you have missed if you would try the same thing verbally, right? So it's better to always write and spell check with the interview subject, and then you can ask for details. Not just the broad title of what has happened. You can also find out the order in which things have happened, right? Be prepared to challenge your sources about apparent discrepancies that have occurred. And then you can also get the exact times of events also, but get the chronology too, even if that means just appropriate times. If if you have to ask follow-up questions, you have to ask. Okay. Now, for example, you can say how long did it take for the police to arrive at the scene. All this basic information at the chronological order you can ask. Okay. Then you can describe the scene and note it down with the thought of writing later, right? And then you can, for example, basic integrities like if you are interviewing an eyewitness, you can also ask some basic questions like where the street lights working there when the crime took place. Okay, all these things, where the accident happened, you have to take a note of all these things. So why it is these are all basic integrities of 5 W's and 1 H. See what caused the event you're writing a story about, or what contributed to it. So this is the place to ask for background that will help you and your readers understand what has happened. Okay. Then you can also ask about what do witnesses or participants think is most relevant. Like how do they describe the events as unfolding, or what seems most significant in their account of things. So these are the detailed accounts of eyewitnesses. Okay. See, how you ask these questions will affect the quality of the information you receive. So common sense will definitely tells us the 5 W's and 1 H are always not enough. We have to dig more. See, since the path to the information that you may need be blocked by the interview subject's unwillingness to cooperate, then an important part of your job as a journalist is to know if you're not getting the right answer. So that has to be known, right? If you're not, you also need to know what to do about it, how to get that information, right? See, there are numerous reasons why you may not get true answers, right? The people you interview may simply be reluctant to make a commitment or to appear to be pinned down. So as noted, they may be fearful the truth will embarrass them or people they support. So some interview subjects quickly turn their answers into, long discourses, and they change the track, which makes little sense and are difficult to quote. Or others might simply give yes or no response to your questions, okay, with no context of elaboration. So these one are even harder to quote. So this is all about interview. Any doubts here about interviews? Yes, you can unmute yourself.
No, ma'am, no, everything has explained clearly.
Okay. So conducting interview is a very important thing, right, for a journalist to get information. And then we have something called as column writing. Do you know what is a column? See, column has been described as an editorial with a byline by the journalist, right? These are yes. So column has been described as an editorial with a byline by the journalist, and also there are many phases of similarities between a column in an editorial, which makes the distinction and difference, really matter for experts' opinion. So they bear close similarities as far as their form or style or material or subject is concerned. So, however, all the columns cannot be said to have close similarities with an editorial, but it has been rightly said that column writing is one of the most satisfying and rewarding journalistic exercise, or we can say an assignment, which is equal to personalized journalism. Okay, you have a byline, and then it is the field where a column writer is invested with ample independence and liberty to write on any topic or subject. That means you can give your viewpoints here, and with a clear flair of creative approach. It's different from a news story. And editorials and columns are not considered real news stories and usually reflect the opinion of their writer. Okay. Columns are considered most powerful because columns message is always very strong, both for the readers and people who are connected to the writing in any way, because people prefer to analyze and react, right? And secondly, we can say columns are read by those who are either the decision makers of the critics, and hence it adds to the fact that the columns are most powerful part of any newspaper. And we can say that present day columns are mostly political, which is due to the political situation of the country. And nevertheless, people are writing on other subjects as well, which are of common interest, right? So columnists, they become, we can say they have become known over a short period of time, depending upon the subject choice, subject matter. Some choose to write political, right? And their language is different, their ideas and their wisdoms beside their attributes. All these play a crucial role in column writing, right? The news can be one-sided version at times, but analysis, criticism, and solution given in the columns are definitely presenting a well-rounded picture, right? So due to this reason, columns are considered to be the highly opinionated write-ups, right? It's different from editorial, but they are opinionated. That means you're free to give your opinion in a creative manner. You can apply your creative approach. However, balancing factors are always there to have better write-ups, okay? And there is lot of scope. Because column writing is the hardest type of writing of all because it requires good thinking and analytical thinking. So to write a good column, it requires more than just the ability to articulate an opinion, okay? Your opinions must make sense here. You should provide insight and you have to be convincing in your column. And you must do all this in an entertaining way, of course, okay? Humorous way. And anybody can be trained to write straight news because it's very mechanical. It's just a factual representation. But feature articles, though also sometimes they are humorous and are harder because they also require good writing skills. But column writing, it's the very hardest type of writing of all because it requires good analytical thinking. So to write a good column, it requires more than just the ability to articulate an opinion, but your opinions must make sense here. They provide insights and you have to be convincing. And then it requires you to be almost like a lawyer here, right? Through your arguments, you will need to convince the jury. That means jury in the sense your readers here, that your client is maybe your viewpoint, okay? That your viewpoint is right. So you have to shape a powerful argument. You have to take practice and requires both uh, breadth and depth knowledge of the subject as well as the ability to critically analyze a given subject or a particular issue. Okay, And column writing is different from other forms of writing because unlike straight news and feature writing, as columns have dedicated readership, they have separate fan base, they have separate fan loyalty. So a columnist, what he does is he develops a following of his readers because they feel they can gain knowledge and insight and also some entertainment from reading his writings, right? From reading the columns. So although there are similarities between an editorial and a column, but sometimes a column may have a the approach can be in a humorous way. So understood what are columns? So you can go through the newspaper, right? The op-ed page, you have a lot of columns. You have M.J. Akbar. He's also a very famous noted columnist. You can read his columns, okay, to get an insight. Okay, and there are many interview techniques as well. See, as I told, the art of interviewing is as personal as the art of writing, right? So every reporter, they bring a different demeanor and skill to the job of interviewing because all interviews are designed to accomplish one mission, that is to get information to advance a story. So this is best achieved with, a proper organization and proper preparation, whether it's a 5-minute phone interview or a 2-hour confrontational interview, that is a personal interview. So interviewing, in conclusion, we can say it's not an ignorant skill, but it's interesting to know how many, there are many journalism schools which offer these courses, also dedicated courses for interviewing skills and other soft skills. Okay, so interviewing is at once an art and a science, and also a good interview feels like a conversation. Okay, and it also moves relentlessly towards the relevant truth. That means it leads obviously it will lead you to the truth, the information which you are seeking to advance your story. So the successful interviewer will capture this and the scattered memories of the interview subject by using techniques that resemble, by simply asking questions like how do you know that, and all. For example, the skilled interviewer will use memory manipulation to organize the brain of the interview subject. Okay, you have to make them understand that events are brought into focus. Okay, and then there are so many tools at your disposal, like beside the conversation. You have to keep the build a good rapport with them, and also you don't have to assume everything. You have to get clarification from the interview subject about the event. So there are a lot of techniques which you can use to get information. Okay, any doubts in interviews, columns, interviewing techniques?
No, ma'am.
Okay, so then that's all for today. Then we'll discuss the remaining topics in the next class. Okay, next Sunday.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.
Welcome. If you have any doubts, let me know.